Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining this exceptional session with our distinguished panelists. This session is changing the tune, rethinking school music programs to meet student interests and needs. I can attest from the work that all these panelists are doing in schools, and now Darren is in a university setting, but he's worked in many schools, that they are truly transforming what music education looks like in schools across the country. And so we're so thrilled to have them join us today. Nick Godsoe from MusiCounts will be moderating. He is the director of programs and education for MusiCounts, Canada's music education charity. And I'll hand it over to Nick to get the panel session started. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Evelyn. Hi, y'all. My name is Nick. Like Evelyn said, I work on the team at MusiCounts. If you're not familiar with MusiCounts, we are a national music education charity, and every year we allocate grants to schools and community organizations all across the country so that they can purchase whatever instruments, gear, materials they need to make music better, whatever that looks like for them. One of the great privileges of working with MusiCounts is we get to review, the hundreds of applications for funding that we receive every year. And what's been so special to observe, particularly over the past couple of years, is how much music education is changing in this country, and how teachers are taking, leaps of faith to implement programs that better align with the needs and the interests and cultural identities of the kids that those programs serve. And working with these three fabulous folks right here, they're like such a testament to the power in taking that leap of faith and trying something new, and being able to observe the really positive results of that. So I think maybe what we'll do is we'll start. Maybe each of you can just maybe tell a bit of a story about who you are, what your music program kind of looked like when you got there, and what kind of change you brought to that program, and what that looked like. Darren, you want to start us off?
Good afternoon. My name is Darren Hamilton. I am currently an assistant professor of music education at the University of Toronto. I'm in my third year in that role. Prior to that, I spent 15 years with the Peel District School Board teaching high school music. I taught at two different schools while I was with the Peel Board, and in both schools, I'll probably speak more about the latter school, but in both schools I entered traditional music programs that had traditional band or traditional choir, or music and computers. The work that I was able to do at David Suzuki, which was my most recent high school, was to implement a new course that was called the Sights and Sounds of Hip Hop and R&B. And that course was implemented as a result of responding to the needs of our demographic, which was a predominantly Black and South Asian demographic in Peel. Noticing that many of the students were not engaging in the traditional music programming, and after going through, I think I might be jumping ahead a little bit, but so I started that program. I'll save that until later. I started that program and implemented this hip hop and R&B program to basically diversify the curriculum. In addition to that, while doing my graduate work at U of T in music education, I also had the opportunity to start the curricular gospel choir course at University of Toronto that I've been directing since 2019, and that has also been a huge contribution to diversity in the curriculum at U of T and in our faculty. And so those are things that I've done.
Thanks, Darren. Darren is chronically modest, and I have to embarrass him every time I do any work with Darren. Darren was the 2022 MusiCounts Teacher of the Year as well, which is a JUNO Award for a music educator. Probably one of my favorite parts of the job is being able to bring 5 incredible deserving music educators to the JUNO Awards, give them the celebrity treatment all weekend, take them on the red carpet, and then Darren was celebrated on the broadcast as a winner. Zita was a finalist for the award in 2023. Yes.
Hi, I'm Zita Ali. I am a middle school music teacher at Sunnyview Middle School in Peel, and I've only been a full-time music teacher since 2021. When I got hired for the job, our program, we had buckets. some sticks. We had a lot of guitars. However, the music program that I walked into was completely ignoring the Black, Caribbean, South Asian, West African demographic that we have at our school. So thank you to MusiCounts. I got a $20,000 grant. I played steel pan in Guyana. It's a Caribbean thing, and bought a whole set of steel pans, and now I have 6 bands. We've performed at so large venues. We play a lot of Caribbean music. We play a lot of South Asian music. I also have some traditional South Asian instruments. And since I've been doing that, the music department at my school has completely exploded because the kids are feeling something familiar. They're feeling something that's close to their ancestry. And my teaching model is how we do it in community, by seeing, by doing. Previously, they had to really do the Eurocentric program, which wasn't connecting with them. So I try to revamp it in a way that they're taught by their grandfathers in the Gurdwara, the way I was taught Pan, by having an elder show me. So I try to create a musical community that empowers my students. And so that's what I've been doing.
Thank you. And Nicole.
Hi everyone, I'm Nicole Schutz. I am Métis from Prince Albert, Saskatchewan in Edmonton, Alberta now. And for 24 years, I was a music educator. And I was at the same school for 21 of those 24 years, which I know, it's right? I just switched roles. I'm calling it my midlife crisis because I probably could have retired there, but my school program changed after I did my master's. My very first course that I took was on world music pedagogy, and I was classically trained. My grandpa was a hunter and a fiddler, but died before I was 2 when he passed away, so I don't remember the fiddle tradition, the Métis tradition from my grandfather. But at this world music course, what I thought I was going to get was to learn about different traditional music at a very surface level, but the very first assignment was based on our personal identity. And I was like, well, I wasn't here to do that. I was here to learn other things. And it was, the flip in my brain was so significant that I started to rethink everything I had done for the first 15 years of my career. And now I had been working towards, and it was just around the calls of action where I started to bring in Indigenous music into the classroom, and navigating that through a very traditional curriculum mandated by government, where Indigenous music is considered ethnic or other. And we now have in our teaching quality standards, Indigenous education must be embedded in all of our classes. So I was able to kind of navigate my personal identity, working through the music of Métis music, and bringing in Cree music as my call to reconciliation, and working through that with my students.
Thanks, Nicole. And Nicole has worked with MusiCounts in the past, helping us create resources to help teachers bring Indigenous music into the classroom if they haven't done that before. And maybe you can speak to those resources a bit later, but they're free on the MusiCounts website, and they're designed for music educators who maybe haven't done that, but have a desire to, or are curious about it, or not sure where to start. So we appreciate help with that. So what was it like for your students when you started bringing that music into your program? What was their experience when they noticed that change that you were bringing in?
It changed so much over the 10 years, but the very first time I was working with, she was a consultant actually in the role that I am with now, and she was a fancy shawl dancer, a Cree, a Dene, fancy shawl dancer, and she had taught me when I was starting to inquire, like, how can I do this a little bit better, talking about the tradition of powwow and how it's a celebration where there's food, there's singing, there's dancing, and it was visiting and all of these traditions. And we started to see, well, I celebrate with food and songs and dance, and so we were able to bridge gap between what seemed different about us to what is similar about us. And so that was the biggest, the kind of the beginning was recognizing our own identity through the similarities. But it grew from being able to sing with elders and working with elders and singing in different languages and bringing in different Treaty 6 traditions was kind of my goal. But yeah, it has grown and it has changed, and I left it behind. But now my role is to help other music educators to be able to sing. We have new choirs. We have a big Truth and Reconciliation event. And so it's starting to spread a little bit through our district, so yeah.
Cool. And so Darren, you were at your school for a few years, kind of operating in a traditional music education context. What led you to the point of knowing that a change needed to happen, and what was it like to kind of go through that and learn from that with your students? And yeah.
Well, as I said earlier, one of the things I observed was that there was, although we had a very diverse school community, that when I looked at the demographics of the students that were taking music, it didn't reflect the broader school community, and I questioned why was that. And so what I did, I was also particularly concerned about identifying as a Black music teacher and not seeing, knowing that there were a lot of Black students attending my school, but they weren't actually taking music classes, and that kind of being something that I've observed a lot throughout my music education journey, where I did not see a lot of people that looked like me engaging in any type of formal music education. I made a point of creating a survey, just had a Padlet, a Google form, and we went out on lunch breaks, and for a full week we surveyed students just in the hallways during lunch break. We approached Black students from grade 9 to 12 to get them to complete the survey and to kind of give their feedback as to, are they interested in music? Why are they, if they are interested in music, how come they're not taking music class? And what would it take to get them interested in taking music class? And that feedback reported that many of the students had a high interest in hip hop and R&B music, and they expressed that this is what they were listening to outside of school, and they weren't having the opportunity to engage in that music inside of school. And so they had expressed that they would be interested in taking music if they had the opportunity to do that. And so that's what led to the changes. In addition to that, I forgot to mention that in our traditional band class, we've also started to engage in modern popular music pedagogy through a graduate course I took on informal music learning. I started to embed those approaches in the traditional band class, and with the help of grants from MusiCounts, we were not only able to acquire DJ consoles to support our hip hop and R&B program, but we were also able to acquire a lot of instruments to facilitate our modern band curriculum in our traditional band class. Things such as electronic drum kits, electric guitars, electric bass guitars, electric keyboards, and electric keyboard amps, drum, guitar, bass guitar amps. And so being able to acquire those equipments and to engage students in popular music that they were listening to outside of the classroom in the school setting was also instrumental in attracting more students to the music class.
So it attracted more students. What was the response like? What was it like when you finally got all this gear, you developed the course, you started executing things?
Yeah, it was great. One of the things that I found really interesting was seeing how much students were more interested and engaged in taking their instruments home to practice. I had students literally coming after school to pick up their guitar case, to pick up a guitar amp to bring home so that they can practice their guitar at home, or to pick up the DJ consoles to take home so they can work on their DJ skills at home, and then to bring it back to work in the classroom.
Awesome. And Zita, you essentially got to your school and then promptly applied to MusiCounts. How did you happen upon that, and did you share that with your administrator? Were they along for the ride? What was that like?
It was actually my principal's idea. So my principal, Melissa Francis, is Guyanese as well. And her father played in a steel pan band called the Roy Getty Silvertones in Guyana. And when I was a kid, I spent a lot of time at the hotel watching them rehearse, and it was that band that taught me how to play pan, so it's a weird crossing of the universe. And when she got hired, she said, Zita, do you know anything about steel pan? And I went, oh my God, thank goodness you asked that, because I've had pieces of music, but never full time, and I've always said to school administrators, before I got to music, I know that we had acquired 3 steel pans, but then they went into storage, and it was a bit of a, why would we get a steel pan? Well, steel pan, what that? But I was very lucky to be hired by this woman who actually had it in her head to change the music program as well as that. And so it was very easy at that point to do it, yeah.
So the music program at your school changed a lot once you got the grant, what it was before, what it was after. So tell us about maybe what it was like when you got the instruments, introducing them to the students, and then maybe where the program is now a few years later.
Well, I had to learn a lot about arranging Caribbean music because notation does not exist for Byron Lee and the Dragonaires. And so what I do is, well, I got the whole set of pans and said, well, I'm Caribbean and we have a lot of Caribbean kids. How do I get us not to play? The steel pan is usually related to cruise ships and island resorts, right? And I don't like that because it's the pleasure of Western guests and its background. And it's an instrument of resistance from Trinidad. It's an instrument of science. And so I didn't want to do it injustice by just playing the surface idea of what Caribbean music is. So coming from that culture, I would listen to it, and I would dissect every piece, and I would arrange the music using my piano. Just like I would an orchestra. I'm a classically trained musician as well, so I try to make a score. Soprano, alto, tenor. Who would be the violins, who would be the bass, who would be the brass. And it took a lot of work, but I got into it. So once I arranged those songs, I started teaching the kids. And one of the big hits we always play every year, although I'm sick of it, the kids want to do it, is Dollar Wine by Colin Lucas, cent, 5 cent, 10 cent dollar. And once I started teaching them that, the Caribbean kids from Trinidad, Guyana, Jamaica, Bajans, they were like, oh my God, we played this at all their wedding. They lost their mind. So once they heard that, and then South Asian, being Indo-Guyanese, I grew up with Bollywood hits my whole life, and so the South Asian kids, I was like, wow, let's do something from a movie they've all seen. So we've done Kuch Kuch Hota Hai Bole Chudian. And so for the South Asian kids, when they're learning that, they're stunned. They cannot believe that they're doing the music that they dance to at weddings, or they see Shah Rukh Khan doing on TV, and it blows their mind, and then they really, really like to do it. So right now, like I said, it's a very, very busy time. But like Darren, also you got to give them what they want. So I had to score Soda Pop at K-pop Demon Slayer last week because they wanted it. So the advantage of being able to arrange music by ear, I think, is lucky, because I don't know how I would figure out the notation for songs where notation doesn't exist. So it's an ongoing process.
And you're not using notation, your students aren't using notation when they're performing right now?
No, because a lot of our kids come from schools that don't have, they have it, but when in the Caribbean, when the kids from India, they learn a very different way. When they learn the harmonium, they learn a Karthik scale, and they learn by doing. And when they're in the Caribbean, the way I learned was you write just the letters down, and then you have capital letters for the outer pan, small caps for the inner pan, but the rhythm is done by feeling. So there's a lot of dancing, we dance around to feel the rhythm. So I had to create this whole, I didn't create it, it existed in the Caribbean. So I took the traditional way of doing it. And it's accessible for kids who don't have money for private lessons. It's accessible for new kids coming from, we got a couple new kids from Trinidad who didn't know how to read music, but knew how to read pan. So anyone can play it once you learn the system. So that's what I prefer to use for all kids.
And your program now, do you want to speak to the scope and the size of where it's at now compared to where it was a few years ago?
Well, I hear a lot of metal all day. Yeah, I started with just, I think, junior, senior, and the All-Stars. The All-Stars is like really good. Now I have about 6 steel pan bands. I have a junior band, grade 7 band, grade 8 band, scrap band, all-star band, and in the morning is reggae. So they usually come in and we just loosely jam in the mornings to reggae. There's a waiting list of kids, so you have to show up to rehearsal or someone's gonna take your spot because there's such a big waiting list. And yeah, it's overwhelming, but in a really good way so in our school, the majority of the black students are in my steel pan band. So when I look at our Caribbean Student Union, I see all my band members, and that makes me really happy that most of the black Caribbean kids and the Indo-Caribbean kids are in my room all the time. And the South Asian kids, because, it's just everyone.
That's so special. That's so cool. Nicole, do you want to speak a little bit to the process you went through in terms of doing that outreach to your local elder and those Indigenous community members? What was working with them like to bring that music into your school?
That was probably, that has been the most influential piece, because it was building relationships, which is the most important part with Indigenous music that I have come to know. Prior to that, I have been lucky to, our friend Cheryl Sue Pegahan was writing children's songs to be used in the classroom. Who is now my supervisor, had reached out to me about 3 years ago asking if my choir, which I hadn't had yet because of the pandemic, so that was in the springtime, if we wanted to work with an elder and sing a song with this elder. And so right away I said, that is my next step. I really want to build a relationship. And so I met with a Métis elder who made rattles with us, and built a relationship with her. And then in September, just before the Truth and Reconciliation event, which is what we were asked to sing for, I met Elder Leo. Well, he doesn't want to be called elder, because when you're an elder, it's a name that is given to you. So we called him Uncle Leo. I still want to call him Elder Leo, but Uncle Leo came to visit. And there was no schedule. There was a schedule that I had to throw out the window because it's all based on relationship building. And he had told us, after we had met for about an hour and then he came to work with the students, the song that he had shared it's called the Grandmother Song. And it's a very well-known song across Alberta. And he said, you watch, something's going to happen. And from the stories that he shared about how the song came to be, to how it was performed, to the experiences that people had prior to us singing with him, he said, you're going to see something is going to happen. And we performed with, I think I had 80 grade 5 and 6 students on the stage. And that night it went viral, which was very exciting to 5th and 6th graders. I think there was like 50 views over the weekend. And he was getting phone calls about how it was 10 years of therapy for residential school survivors, because they had never heard their language sung in public on a stage with a diverse group of students. So I had students who were Asian. I was at a Mandarin bilingual school, to our Indigenous students, to our Euro-Canadian students. And so that experience, we still have relationship. So I've been able to go back and work with Leo on a couple with research, and it's definitely built on relationship. And so I saw them just a couple weeks ago, and that way of learning is so different. Because you have to put your heart into it. So in the role that I have now, we talk about it's hard because it's heart work. And when you're doing heart work, it takes a lot out of you because you do it all the time. You want to do it at nighttime, you want to do it, my husband calls, I call it fun, he calls it fun work. And he's like, oh, look, you're working. I'm like, no, I'm having fun. I'm working to, making it was during our work with Nick on the 13 principles, where we were really able to analyze like how you work with an elder, and I was able to go back and think about this relationship that I still have, and now that's how I want to engage other people with their learning, is not just what I can step with a piece of music, but working with community.
Thank you, Nicole. So all of these, approaches to music education are obviously departures from a pretty well-established norm in music education culture, right? A norm that is pretty consistently upheld in most of our provincial curriculum and most post-secondary institutions that train future music educators. How do these innovative approaches fit into a culture of music education that is still pretty centered on a Western way of doing things? Are you able to speak to that a little bit, Dan?
Well, I think all of these approaches are very much essential and important for the change in our climate in music education. And so I know that a lot of post-secondary schools right now have been making a lot of strides in terms of diversifying their post-secondary music curriculum, including things like cultural music ensemble courses in their curriculum, their post-secondary curriculum, or incorporating new programs like community music programs. At U of T, for example, we have a large number of, and even at York as well, a large number of ensembles, cultural music ensembles. We have a steel band ensemble, we have a African drumming and dance ensemble, we have gospel choir, we have Japanese taiko drumming. So we have a lot of these courses are coming up in the institutions. It's still a ways to go in the sense that in a lot of the post-secondary institutions that are including these courses, they are offered as optional courses, if you will, or they're not embedded in the curriculum in such a way that it's that students are taking them more dominantly, but they're kind of electives. They're electives. That's the word I was looking for. And so I think there's still a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of bringing these courses up to par, bringing them up to the same level that a lot of the traditional ensembles and courses are at. But there's certainly change that has occurred, especially over the last 10 to 20 years.
And thinking back to when you were in the classroom, what was it like developing this new course and kind of contextualizing it within the curriculum that you were to follow? What was that process like?
That process was very, very interesting. Obviously, it was a lot of work to figure out how to best incorporate popular music or hip hop and R&B into the classroom. It involved a lot of connecting with other educators or even community members, people who, for example, DJ outside in the community and learning from them. How would you bring these skills and these approaches into a curricular format, bringing in guest speakers to do workshops with students. So there was a lot of that involved. And I think the other important piece was the historical and cultural background piece. So I liked what Zita said earlier about steel pan and not thinking about the instrument in terms of its use on cruise ships, for example, but digging more deeper into the cultural use of the instrument. And so there was a lot of that. A lot of that was involved with the MusiCounts hip hop resource as well. A lot of research to learn about the history and the culture of the music and embedding that into what was being brought into the curriculum. So not just engaging the students in the performance aspect of the music, but also the teaching of the history and the culture, which was really important as well.
Thanks, Taryn. Have any of you ever experienced any resistance or any negative feedback in terms of reorienting what music education looked like at your school, and if so, how did you go about navigating that?
I feel that the validity of what I was doing was often questioned. I think that a lot of school boards have a lot of discriminatory hiring practices, and I think that's why there's not a lot, of Black music teachers or South Asian music teachers or teachers that look like us. Because I had been applying for music jobs for 17 years and was always told you're not the right fit, you don't have the skill, you don't have the chops, we don't know your music, it's not India, what are you doing? So there was a lot of that backlash. And even when I got the position, there was a lot of resistance because I had replaced someone who didn't look like me. And all of a sudden it became a very racially charged school for a little while. I was accused of being a DEI hire, which wasn't true. I have qualifications, but the problem with that is, to constantly say, people go, oh, but it's not like Beethoven, weren't you doing classical, I'm not gonna say the band standard, J.W. Pepper band standards, I guess every music teacher is kind of familiar with. What do you mean this is what you're doing? And because they don't know that the music from our people is incredibly intricate, incredibly difficult, Euro standards are 2/4/4/4 time. Caribbean music and djembe, West African drumming is like 6/8, 5/6. Like it's, if you're gonna play the tabla, I can't even comprehend the 4th, the 16th that come into that. So the idea, I found the resistance was, they're only doing this because the board has a new direction instead of actually looking at the transformative power that it has. And I think I'm gonna say, and I'm doing a presentation on Friday that says, people of color, marginalized people, just because we get a seat at the table, it doesn't mean that we're getting served. So that was really 4 years of that. But that only makes me work harder, it makes me empower my kids harder. So for me, it was very discriminatory.
And where is that sentiment now that the proof is in the pudding of these kids being so enthusiastic and so engaged with the work?
I have a lot of, it's impacted the community around the school, not so much the people within my school, but I've got old Jamaican grandmas coming and learning pan after school. I do a lot of work with the Church of God. One of my students won a scholarship for playing pan. She did it for her church. I believe it's the Church of God. She won. She went down to Tennessee and played a song that I worked with her on, a Christian song, and she won a scholarship for her first year of university. So not so much, I don't really care, to be honest, about the people in my building that are grown-ups, because that's not what I'm there for. I'm there for the kids. I'm there for them to get scholarships, to get their foot in the door, so that they feel proud of who they are and can carry it forward.
Either of you have anything to comment in terms of navigating?
I actually had a lot of support from my staff because the teaching quality standard that we have of embedding Indigenous knowledge, and I was able to help guide teachers to do it in their other curricular areas. But they had to slow me down a little bit. They're like, okay, let's just slow down, because I was ready to go. But no, I think it was the shift. The curriculum that I have is so old. 1989, I think, is the curriculum we're using. They proposed a new curriculum and we said no thank you. And so it's on the drawing board indefinitely. That's a whole other panel discussion. But what I love about it is that it's general music, what it is in elementary. And so we sing all kinds of songs. We dance all kinds of dance. And so we are able to kind of take the other part and just throw, but this ethnic, this other way of thinking, we're just going to put that part to the side, where we're going to sing all of these songs and do all of these dances. So I've had a lot of support. And it was my principals who actually had said, you need to move past the 4 walls and pass it along. So it was just through their continuous support of that. But yeah, they were ready. They were ready to go-ish. I was ready to soar, but it breaks them a little bit.
And Darren, I know you spoke a little bit to how some post-secondary institutions are making these strides in terms of diversifying what these training programs for future musicians, future music educators look like. But I know you said there's still a long way to go. But what do you think? If you could kind of look at a university administrator, if you could talk to someone, what's to be gained by like a more holistic integration of these more diverse approaches and these types of programs?
Yeah, well, I think music education is something, obviously, there are going to be students that are pursuing music education because they want to pursue it as their lifelong career. But there's also students that want to pursue music education because they want to engage in music for their own, development or their own self-fulfillment. And so I think having access to music education and being aware that there are these different pathways, if you will, these different ways that we can engage in music is really important. Just to use as an example, I know at York University or even at U of T as of this year that there are courses that we offer the faculty where they are open to non-music majors. And so students who are not music majors are still able to engage in music making through some of these courses, specifically courses like the cultural-based ensembles, where because of the oral approach to engaging in music making in those ensembles, the barrier of having to have that, the prerequisite knowledge of being able to read sheet music is stripped away, and so students who otherwise would not be able to engage in a traditional music ensemble that requires them to be able to read sheet music in order to be able to engage in the music making, they're now able to participate in these types of cultural ensembles because they're more accessible. And so those types of ensembles have been really popular and have opened up doors for students to engage in ways that traditionally they haven't been able to before.
And hopefully, Darren, maybe you can speak a little bit to what it was like for you to make the decision to move from being a classroom educator to being a university faculty member. Sorry. What was that decision-making process like for you? Why was it difficult and why is it rewarding?
Wow, Nick, you're putting me on the spot today. So I pursued my master's degree and my doctorate degree on a part-time basis while I was a full-time teacher, which is, just looking back, that was a very, I don't know how I did it. But as I said earlier, one of the things that really propelled me to do this work was observing and going through a system where as a person of color, a marginalized musician and music educator, I'm constantly going into spaces, music education spaces, where I'm not seeing a lot of folks that look like me represented in those spaces, whether there are other Black musicians that are studying in these programs. I'll give you an example. When I went to college out west in Edmonton, I went to Grant MacEwan College, by the way, and I went there for my music college diploma. We had a cohort of about 200 music students in that cohort, and out of the 200, myself and one other female musician from Saskatchewan were the only two Black musicians or Black students in that program. So do the math, that's like less than 1%, or 1%. So, going through those types of experiences where I've seen, I know a lot of gospel musicians, for example, from the gospel community that I grew up in, who started off pursuing formal training. A lot of them went to Humber College, Humber College's jazz program, and started off, and within a year to 2 years, they dropped out. Not because they weren't fabulous musicians, but it was because they didn't have the theory skills that were being demanded of them while they were in these formal programs. And so many of them ended up dropping out of the programs and just continued touring or playing with people on the side, or pursuing their passion but not acquiring the credentials because they didn't have those skills. And so what really drove me to move to post-secondary was recognizing and understanding that there needed to be a shift. There needed to be a change in what was happening at the post-secondary level if we were going to see shifts in elementary and secondary music, that we needed to have more diverse music courses being offered at the post-secondary level. We needed to have access, or teachers are in training needed to have access to those courses, those cultural courses at the post-secondary level, that we're going to then provide them with the tools to allow them to feel more comfortable bringing those various styles of cultural musics into their elementary and their secondary classrooms. And so that was the thing that inspired me, propelled me to make that shift. I felt that through my own lived experiences as well as my academic work, that I felt that it was important to be engaged in doing that work at the post-secondary level and helping to create those opportunities and those changes for the next generation. So I was sharing with Nicole and Zita earlier today, I currently teach a first-year Introduction to Music Education course, and this course has been designed in such a way that the topics that we cover throughout the course, it's broken down into 3 broad themes. We cover traditional Western-based approaches to music education, and then we also cover cultural-based approaches to music education, and then we also cover popular music-based approaches to music education. And so having the opportunity to shift the mindset of this next generation of future music educators, I think, is really important. For them to be able to see that music education is not just what they have experienced coming up in elementary and high school, and even what they are experiencing for the majority of their undergraduate programs in terms of the ensembles that they're participating in, but they're starting to have access and to explore and to think about these other approaches to music education that they can then bring into their future music education context, whatever that may be.
Thank you. Nicole, same question for you. What was it like after being a teacher for so long, to make that change? What drove you to do it, and what are you optimistic for in this new role when you get back to work?
Yeah. I don't know if you've heard the news about Alberta teachers, but so it was really interesting. I have a small population of identifying Indigenous students. And they had come up to me in January where they wanted more in their school. And they weren't sure what that meant. So I had decided to create an Indigenous advisory group of students. And so they were talking about how they just wanted to be together. And I had this idea, we're gonna plan for the school. And they were like, can we just hang out? So we were hanging out on Fridays, and then they started talking about racism, and when we smudge, the kids at school think that we smell like pot, and so they don't like the smell. And so I'm like, well, I think we can still meet together as a group of Indigenous people, but I think we need to teach others as well. Because that's how we're going to make changes, is if we're starting to include other people in the culture. And I had when we started the Culture Club, that was just in May of this past year. So we started in June with the advisory group, and then in May, maybe April, May, we had this culture group, and there were 75 students that came to do Indigenous games, to do beading, to do painting, whatever we came up with. And then it was just before the May long weekend, I got from the supervisor who had contacted me about Singing with Elder Leo, had contacted me that this position was open, and I don't know if you're looking for change. And I had been at my school for 21 years, so no, I'm not looking for change. But when I started thinking a little bit more deeply about it, it was those Indigenous students who weren't feeling seen in their school that led me to think, well, I need to help other teachers do the same thing. And they were so upset that I was leaving because they weren't sure what was going to happen next, because I was the lead teacher in Indigenous education, and now I was leaving and what was going to happen. And I said, I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm going to help other teachers figure out what to do. And so it was a really hard decision because I love teaching music. And I love making music with children. And it's been an adjustment because it feels a lot like grad school right now, where I'm doing a lot of reading and a lot of research, which is kind of the fun part. And I was just beginning to get to do some school visits, and then we went on strike. So I can't tell you how it's going. The potential is amazing. I think you said the potential, the prospects of what it's going to be. But it is a position where if I decide I need to go back to the classroom, I can shift back into that role. But as it's going, I feel like I'm not specifically doing music education with it, and I think that's the part that's missing a little bit, is music in the schools, art in the schools, and how do we bring Indigenous music into the broader context. So that's what I'm looking forward to eventually, soon. We cross our fingers.
Thanks, Will. Hoping we can end off by just maybe having each of you share a piece of advice you would offer to different stakeholders along this journey. So maybe let's start with what would you say to a teacher? Let's say they're in a more traditional context and they're keen to try doing something different at their school, but they're feeling overwhelmed, they're not sure where to start, they're not sure if it's for them. What would you say to them? Darren, do you want to start?
Sure. I would say to the teacher that is interested in getting started with engaging in other forms of music, cultural forms of music, or popular forms, non-traditional forms of music, I would say to them, don't be afraid to start. Start small. Engage cultural bearers, engage experts from the community, depending on whatever the genre or the style of music is that you're going to engage in. I would also say engage your students. If you have students who have knowledge and expertise in a particular style of music that is outside of your own comfort zone, that you can also engage those students in as part of the learning. And I think that helps to make them feel more validated and seen when the teacher is approaching them and asking for them to share their knowledge with them or with the class. So yeah, I would say that those would be some places where you can start. I would also say that it's important that if you are going to pursue this work, that you pursue it with a mindset that to be committed about it. To don't approach it as checking off a checklist that, okay, I'm now putting in diversity into my classroom, or not to approach it with a tokenistic mentality or attitude that, okay, now I can say that I did something on cultural music, but to really put in the time and the effort to explore musics that are outside of the norm, to put in the time and the effort to engage with cultural bearers or experts, and to bring them into the classroom, and to build ongoing opportunities for learning and development, as opposed to one-off opportunities within the classroom.
And Zia, what would you say to a teacher who's interested in bringing steel pan into their school, but they don't have the same level of connection or background with that culture, that tradition, as an educator like you?
Currently in my Peel board, I think I'm the only performing steel pan band, actually. So it's kind of a lonely road, but I do coach a lot of teachers, so I have been going to visit schools, and I have been bringing schools in and doing workshops with teachers. And there's a huge interest, but they are overwhelmed, and they're, well, what if I'm appropriating? And there's that idea. I think what I've told all of them is you have to learn to unlearn, like what Darren said. Like, oh, I did something for February, so, to really look deep down inside yourself and go, do I really want to make this change? How can I change within myself to break down my own musical barriers. As a type A classical musician, I learned through my partner, actually it was him, to be more holistic in music, because I was very like band standard. But he said, let it go, just feel it out, and so I do have to credit him for that. Unlearn your colonized way of thinking, which includes me. And there's so many resources. Go to Caravana, get the feel for it. Go to steel pan shows. There's hundreds happening all the time. Look for community projects. Reach out and just always try to learn. Because I mean, if we're educators, we should be learning. I feel like that's something that never ends. So, one step at a time. When you're overwhelmed, it's okay to be overwhelmed, because the end result of that is like completely worth it.
And Nicole, what would you say to a teacher who sees the value in building a partnership with their local Indigenous community, but feels overwhelmed by that, not sure if that's the right thing for them to do, not sure where to go with that?
There's a few things that, and you talked about how you need to know yourself. So there's a lot of the, with Truth and Reconciliation, knowing the history of Canada, the Indigenous people of Canada, but more specific to the people in where you were from. Learning about the Indian Act, like it's kind of we don't want the checkbox is the main thing. And the more you can unlearn colonialism, I had two people came in two very important people to me. Well, actually, people that I heard. One was important to me. One was somebody a speaker that I heard. We've inherited colonialism, and the fear of not making the change perpetuates colonialism. So we can't be afraid. There are people, there are elders, there's community wanting to help you on this journey. The other one was Stephen Point that I heard at Everything is Connected conference, the first one that they had. And he said, reconciliation is the song we sing together. And that was it. Like, okay, done. That is my life lesson now. So reconciliation is the song we sing together, meaning find your local people who are willing to help. And there's a lot of places, like Canadian Friendship Centers, places where people are gathering that are willing to come and work with you. And it's okay to make mistakes. But it's actually like being that vulnerability piece makes you more approachable to the elders in the communities, knowing that you're really trying to learn something, not like come and do something for my students. It's like help us learn more. So I think it's just that building a relationship, and they are available in different ways to find where you can make those relationships.
Thanks, Nicole. I think that's a really nice place for us to stop. Thank you so much to the three of you for sharing your perspectives and your stories. It means a lot. Thank you, everyone. If anybody has any questions, we can do that. If not, you may leave.
Should I grab a mic? Is this mic still live? Still live. Cool. Thank you all so much for your perspectives and their stories. I was so interested in each of the examples, and Zito, in your stories of the resistance to, or the racism that you were facing as the sort of first knee-jerk reaction to this. And I'm so interested by your story of arranging the steel pan using your sort of orchestral arrangement skills, and it kind of leads me to another question, maybe for you or maybe for all of you, about how you think about the relationship of your formal traditional music education and what you're teaching your students in the example of steel pan or Indigenous or popular music styles. And do you feel as a music educator some conflict or some pressure to incorporate some of traditional notation with these other styles so that the students have that kind of musical fluency that you had? Or do you feel that, this is my words, not yours, but like the world of music is so vast that that learning through any slice is enough, and we don't need to incorporate the like traditional notation alongside? So I'm curious your thoughts.
I turned it off. I thought we were done. No, it's a good question. I'm really grateful for my classical training. Like I went hard, like, you know, and I love Bach and I love all that stuff. And I feel like doing all the Barbara Warren theory books every summer and history and harmony really helped me understand music on a really technical, microscopic level of interval sound, tonic, subtonic, like all that stuff. And I do bring that into the classroom. Like we are doing chromatic scales, right? So I teach them half tone, tone, semitone, all that. I do it that way. So we are working on major scales, minor scales. We're still doing all of that stuff, but we play it with a Caribbean flavor. So there's C major scale is done like, because it's a pan, it's also a drum with rhythm. So there is that I do put into the classroom. It's the only difference would be is in terms of how they read the music, but I do take a lot of my classical training and try to put it into technical skills that they will need in order to be successful. The only thing I find hard is teaching the rhythms, because writing out a calypso song, for me, I'm not a rhythm I'm very bad at rhythm. Writing it and doing the fractions, like that's hard for me. So that is the challenge that I think that I have to learn how to find a way. Right now it's taught by doing, but writing it, that will be probably the next thing that I have to look at. So it's a bit of both worlds, I think, that benefits the group of kids that I'm working with.
I was thinking about like being a general music educator, how you come along, it's part of it, right? So it's not that Western music is put to the side at all. It's just more things come alongside it. Yep. Learning about other types of music. With Indigenous music, a lot of the notation is for the teacher only, so that it is still transmitted in oral tradition. And the work that I'm doing with Leo so far has just been through oral transmission. There's nothing written down. I think he's curious about what it might be to write it down. The song, the grandmother's song, it came to him in a dream, and he was looking for an adult choir, which I happen to be, and we haven't gotten this far. But he said, oh yeah, I heard it in harmony. And so he has heard the fullness of that song. I know there's also Andrew Balfour, who is an incredible Cree composer who's taking the classical tradition of choral music, but putting Cree text to it. So he's kind of doing some interesting avenues with it as well. And so I think the bridging the gap between notation and non-notation is sometimes the barrier for some music educators to know, like, well, how do I do it if there isn't notation for it? Or I don't know how it's gonna go if I don't have the sheet music. And so it's just relying on the oral of recording a lot. And I'm interested to see what will happen over the next 10 years of how the connection between the two will intersect a little bit more. I'm wondering about that.
Yeah, for me, while I was teaching high school, I would incorporate traditional Western theory in my isolated theory lessons. But when it came to the practicality of teaching popular band or doing hip hop and R&B stuff, the thing that stands out most for me is what is the authentic what is the authentic learning or musician practice that is associated with that culture or with that genre of music? and being true to that whenever you're engaging with that music in the classroom. So one of my biggest pet peeves is if you are bringing a form of cultural music into the classroom that is traditionally a oral tradition, and then you try and find a score for that music, and you try and teach that music with a score, and you give the students a score and you say, let's sight read this music. They're not engaging in the oral tradition. The other thing with that is that oftentimes scores will be inaccurate for rhythm purposes or for harmonic purposes. And so one of the things that I think is important to acknowledge and to keep front of mind is that each cultural music has its own set of performance and learning practices, and to keep that at front of mind. If you're doing traditional Western music, we know that practice involves learning how to read written scores, reading scored arrangements. If you're doing gospel, if you're doing steel pan, or if you're doing indigenous music, a lot of these forms of music are oral traditions. And it's not that the music theory is not there, it's there. It's just a matter of it being taught in a different way. And I think that is the key. For example, in gospel music, when I teach gospel songs to my choir, a lot of times they're singing in three-part harmony, block chordal harmony. And so I teach that concept of harmony to the students in an oral way. I teach them to sing a major scale using numbers instead of traditional solfege syllables. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 7, 6, 5, 3, 2, 1, so getting them to sing that scale, and then getting them to sing, the 1, the 3, and the 5th degrees of the scale to build that major triad. And so I'm still teaching that traditional harmony, but I'm teaching it in a different way. I'm teaching it in an oral way. I'm teaching it in a way that it's more accessible for students who may not have those traditional skills and that traditional background.
Are we good? Okay, thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.